Murney Tower Museum is a small local museum operated by the Kingston Historical Society in partnership with Parks Canada. It is one of 4 Martello Towers in Kingston, which you may have seen along the waterfront, and it is also part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of the Rideau Canal and Kingston Fortifications. It is the oldest operating museum in Kingston, having celebrated its 95th birthday in 2020. The museum has over 1,000 domestic and military artifacts, and it offers tours, programming, and exhibits. The tower itself was constructed in response to the Oregon Crisis of 1846, when the US president at the time, James Polk, sought to expand American territory by extending the Oregon borders northward into what is present-day British Columbia. And Kingston, although of course we're very far away from the territorial dispute, was a location of strategic importance due to our important position for transportation at the nexus point between the major waterways of Lake Ontario, the Rideau Canal, and the St. Lawrence River. So construction of the tower began in January 1846, but by the time that the tower was eventually armed, the Oregon Crisis that had prompted its construction in the first place had been averted. But although the crisis was avoided, the tower did not sit empty. It was occupied from 1848 to 1885. So first it was manned by the Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment, who lived in the tower until 1871. Then Battery A lived there until 1880, Battery B until 1884. And briefly, the Princess of Wales' own regiment occupied the tower in 1885. So, during most of its history as a military post, Murney Tower was occupied by the Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment, and it is the hats of these soldiers that we will be recreating today. The Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment was raised in 1840 from specially qualified British soldiers who had 15 years of service already and who had proved to be of good conduct. This regiment was formed particularly because of a problem of desertion in British North America, where men who were enlisting in the army in Britain, who after receiving free passage to Canada, would leave for the States. But one of the Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment's duties was to guard the garrison border post to keep watch for anyone who might be deserting. These soldiers who lived in Murney Tower were allowed to take secondary jobs in Kingston, and more of them were allowed to marry in contrast to other regiments. This meant that many of them actually had their wives and their children living with them inside the tower. These families ate, slept, lived on the barracks level, which is the main level of the tower. It could house a maximum of 24 soldiers and 1 officer, or multiple soldiers and their families. Murney Tower never reached this capacity as a military barracks, but it nearly did while operating as housing for multiple military families, with 6 soldiers and their additional family members, which amounted to 22 people. Welcome to March of the Museums 2022. My name is Allison. I'm with Murney Tower Museum, and today we're going to be creating our very own hats, just like the ones that the soldiers who lived in Murney Tower used to wear. So now that we know a little bit about the history of the tower, we can move on to the craft. This activity recreates the hats that were part of the uniform worn by the soldiers of the Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment. And the objective of this workshop is to encourage engagement with the history of the actual people who lived inside of this tower in the 1800s. And it urges us to think about how daily lives have changed over time. A look into the history of these people will also foster a connection between ourselves and the structure of the tower itself, as we begin to imagine how daily tasks, clothing, and even family structures of the past differ from those of today. So let's make sure that we have all of the materials that we're going to need for this activity. You should have received a bag with 2 pieces of black construction paper, like this one, which will form the main part of the hat. You should also have received this printout of the Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment military bugle, and that will be going right in the middle of our hat. You should also have a glue stick in your bag, and last but not least, you should have 2 markers. I'm just going to be using these ones so that I can make my bugle as colorful as possible. You are also going to need 1 roll of tape and a pair of scissors and any other coloring utensils that you might have at home that you would like to use. The first thing that we need to do is make sure that we have a good base for our hat. So you have your black construction paper, which is 12 by 18 inches. And what we're going to do first is cut this about 2/3 of the way up, since this will be the length of our hat and we don't want it to be too tall. So now we can see the piece of paper isn't too long and it will make a good length for the hat. However, this is not quite long enough to go around my head. So I'm going to cut out a piece of the other black construction paper and I'm going to glue it all together to make a piece that will actually fit all the way around my head. So I have my smaller piece and I'm putting it inside the longer strip of construction paper so that I can adjust it to the size of my head, just like this. And I'm going to hold that in place, take it off of my head, and then glue this all together. All right, now we have the base of our hat. I found that the glue wasn't quite strong enough. So in addition, I just added some small pieces of tape here to make sure that it all stays together and can stay on my head. Now we need to create the peak of our hat. So I'm taking the remainder of the construction paper that I have, and I'm going to cut out a crescent shape that we can attach to the front of the hat. All right, now we have our crescent shape And what I'm going to do is I'm going to tape it to the front of a hat, sort of like a baseball cap. All right, so as you saw, I just taped this to the front, and now we have the little peak of the hat. The next thing that we want to do is, with the remainder of our construction paper, cut out a small circle and a small rectangle. The circle should be roughly the size of a coin, and the rectangle should be about 10 centimeters long. So we want to first tape these two together. We want to just take some glue and attach the circle to the end of the rectangle. All right, we have those glued together, and now we're going to attach that to the inside of the front of the hat. Now is where we get to be creative. So you're going to take the bugle printout that you have and cut this right out, and we're going to color it with as many colors as we want, and then place it right on the front of our hat. Now we have our little bugle, so you can take whatever colors you want and you can color it in. I think I'm gonna go with some of these ones. Traditionally this badge is a brassy color, but I just love pink. I couldn't resist. So now that I've colored this in, I'm going to place it right above the peak of the hat. I'm going to use our glue stick to attach that. Congratulations, you are now a proud creator and wearer of a Royal Canadian Rifle Regiment hat. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you had fun creating your hats and that you learned a little bit about the history of the tower and the people who lived there.